my name is Kenzie and I'm going to be painting this watercolor penguin with you. If you would like to just focus on the painting and have the sketch available to you, you can go to the description below, click on my website, it will take you to where you can download the sketch and you can follow along without worrying about drawing. But back to the painting, we do a lot of wet on wet, we do some wet on dry for a little bit of detail. Let's get started. So this right here is my Winsor Newton watercolor paints that I have taken from the tube and put it inside this palette that I got off of Amazon. I have a tapping cloth right here. It's always good to have one. That way you don't have excess water on your page. I also have my 2 water cups right here. One I use for cool paints and one I use for my warmer paint colors. I also have right here my dryer. I like to use this to speed up the process between layers. These are the brushes that I use. These are the silver black velvet. I have size 12, 4, and 8, and these are the round tip brushes. I also like to use bleed proof white. This is a very highly pigmented white, which will sit on top of any type of color. I'm using this painting as an example. I always like to have painter's tape on hand. I like to paint down my paintings. It's easier to, 1, film, and 2, also just keep everything from moving around and it getting a little messy. It also helps to protect your desk, which you'll see mine is very worn, so it definitely does help with that. To get started with this little penguin, I think I'm just gonna do the shading first. So I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna mix some indigo with a little bit of gray. So this is just grabbing the black that I have and just watering it down a lot. And then what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to do the wet on wet technique. So I'm going to come in with a little bit of water into the body. And I am just going to apply a nice soft blend of my color. So now that there's water down, we're going to do the wet on wet technique, which is when you have a wet surface and then you paint another wet surface on top, and you'll see when it touches the water, it just starts to bleed and blend onto your page nice and soft. So I'm going to focus on under the tummy over here, so it kind of gives the belly a little bit of curve. I'm going to come along the sides a little bit, just letting that blend. I'm going to do underneath my little neck. Just ever so slightly along the tummy and here, but I'm going to be leaving my center nice and white. That way it gives the illusion of a white tummy. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try this. All right, now that this is dry, I'm going to come in and do this part under here, doing the exact same thing. Is this, it's not considered a fin. Its arm, I'm going to call it its arm because I'm not exactly sure if it has an actual name for it. Flipper? Maybe it's flipper? Okay, so I'm going to come in and do the wet on wet technique again with the water, and I'm just shadowing different parts, kind of keeping it along the edges, making sure I am leaving a bit of white space. This will just make your white pop. And white space is just a white gap in your paper to give the illusion of white. So I'm coming in with a little bit more gray in here. And I'm going to repeat the other side. So applying some nice water down, coming in with that blue-gray mix where my lines are. I'm going to come in and just shadow a little bit, trying to leave a little bit of white space. And afterwards I'm coming in with a little bit more of a pigmented gray around its little armpit area. I don't even know what you would call it. The underarm area. We'll do that. Okay, and then we're going to let this portion dry, and the next white area as well is actually its face. And I did want there to be a little separation between the body and its face. I'm going to come in here and apply some nice water around its eye. Grabbing that gray and then just going around certain areas, making sure we're leaving the majority of it untouched. Just casting a nice shadow so that this penguin looks as though it has a white face. And around the eye, I'm giving it a little bit of shadow. Okay, and I am going to let this part dry as well. So the next thing that we can do now is we can actually just work on the belly. So I'm not going to come in here with the most pigmented black because then it will just pull our focus too much. I'm going to do a little bit of a gray. Now to make this a realistic penguin, we're going to want to play around a little bit with some dark zones and light zones, which is just our shadows and our highlights. So everything just doesn't look flat and dull. So I'm using the wet on dry technique now, which is when you're painting a dry surface, painting onto a dry surface with wet paint. I just did a little line here, and then what I'm going to do using a damp brush, there's no paint on it, I'm going to touch this line and I am going to blend this to the outer part of my body. It's somewhat similar to the wet on wet technique, but I like to do this sometimes too. Okay, I do want it to be a little bit darker at some spots, so using that wet on wet technique, I'm going to come in and just touch different areas, let that naturally bleed and blend at some points. And if you ever find that you have some harsh lines that you just don't love, it's just too dark, you can just use some water and a damp brush to move it around. Okay, I'm going to keep pulling some colors here around the little armpit area. Get rid of everything on my brush and then using just a damp brush and blend it out. So a little bit darker, so I'm just going to come in and just blend that with a damp brush. Okie dokie. Now I can do the other side. Doing the wet on dry technique with some dark pigment down one side of my penguin. Get rid of everything on my brush and then just dragging out this harsh line so it blends really nice. And then start to get darker around the arm. And just pulling up the color, or shade I should say. Okay, perfect. I like that some spots are darker than the others. This is exactly the kind of look that I was going for. I'm just going to wrap around a little bit of darkness over here, just a hair. And I'm going to pull this over a little bit over here as well. Okay, so now for around the face, we're just going to do similar. We're just going to come in with a wet on dry technique. And we're going to come up through the neck over here. Leaving an open area for a nice highlight. Get rid of everything on my brush, just touching that line. And blend, blend, blend. Coming under my little Santa hat, around his beak. And I'm not doing perfectly straight lines here as well. I'm doing loose lines. Okay, so the next thing that we can do is we can actually work on our penguin's eyes. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in with a nice thick grayish color, and I'm going to leave a little bit of a shine in the eye so it just doesn't look super flat. I'm going to come in with just straight pigment and touch just above it just to let it blend in while it's still wet, just like that. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to do is I want to just put a little bit more of a shadow right in here for its little neck. So I'm just using some nice loose lines here for the neck. I'm going to blend it out with just some water. Just create a little bit more shadow. And my tummy, I can come in while it's still wet. Just do a little bit more of a gray shadow here. And again, this is the wet on dry technique, and this is how we can create depth and dimension within our painting, because the color literally just sits on top. Okay, so now that I just have the slightest little bit, I'm going to come in with a little bit more of a blue under here for some texture just under the eye a little bit. Okay, so now that I have just a little bit more texture in my bird, I'm going to come ahead and just kind of fill out these little areas right here, and then I'll know how much detail I want to put into my painting. So I'm going to come in with a little bit of a brown gray. So I don't want there to be too much gray here. And then I'm going to fill out the feet. So they have little nails that I'm just going to go around. I'll do that part second. I'll do the wet on dry technique for that. And I'm going to stop right here where there's about a quarter way to go. Get rid of everything on my brush and do that wet on dry technique where I'm just dragging out that color. Okay. I'm going to do the same on the other foot. I'm going to apply this brownish black color. Stop where the nails are. Get rid of everything on my brush. And drag it out. For the beak, I'm going to mix up a bit of an orange color for my beak. I already have yellow and red mixed. Get rid of everything in my brush, and then scoop for a highlight. I can scoop it up with a damp brush, just ever so slightly, and then I can come in with a little bit more pigment and just touch towards the bottom for a shadow. And then the hat. So very similar to the body, because this is the Santa hat, is going to be white. We can come in with a little bit of a blue gray color, and we're going to be focusing on creating the shadow of white. So I'm going to come in and just make some rough pom-pom shapes so it looks like it's got some fur and some texture here. And you want to start really light. If you go too dark, you're going to lose your ability to layer on top. So you'll see here I'm going in with a nice light color, just shadowing different points. I'm leaving white space. If you don't leave white space, you're just going to be left with a blue hat. So definitely use some white space. I'm using the very tip of my brush and I'm just blotting. That feels pretty good. Coming around my little pom-pom, I think this would be called a pom-pom. Okay, and I gotta let that dry, and then I can come in with some red for my Santa hat. And again, I'm not gonna be using exact brush strokes except for this outer edge part where the fluff is. I'm gonna use rough, very tip of my brush lines to make it look as though the fur and the white is going inside. I can also get rid of everything on my brush. This is a damp brush, and scoop up for a highlight. Another fun way to actually shadow with red is you can mix it with some purple so it's darker, and then you can shadow with purple. This is my favorite kind of tone to shadow with when it comes to red. All right, so I have to just do my little feet here, and then we can start doing final details. So again, I'm going to come in with a little bit more of a brown, and I can fill out its little nails down here. And the reason why I did it separate is because it would look like a big blob. Now that it has a little bit of time to dry, it just sits on top of that dark color and it actually looks a little separate. So it looks like nails, again, not like a big blob. So that's why I like to take that section by section. I can even, again, scoop. So there's a little bit of depth in there. Okay, I'm gonna dry everything and let's see where we're at. Okay, now that everything is dry, I can come in and just add some final details, and this will just kind of elevate your painting. So right in here where this little line is, I can come in and just give it a little bit of a shadow just to make my foot area not just look so flat. And you can just blend it out with a little bit of water. I went kind of dark here, so I'm just going to scoop up some of that color here. Otherwise it's going to stand out a little bit too much, which I don't love the idea of. You can add more shadowings as well. Even on the nails, add a little bit more depth on one side. So the trick here is when you're adding extra layers is you want to make sure when you're doing this, you're letting that first layer shine through as well. So you're going to see here when I'm coming in and I'm painting this detail part, I'm not completely covering the layers that I've already done underneath. Otherwise, you're basically just making that color darker, but because I'm coming in and just painting over top, letting that first layer shine through, you're going to create some nice depth in your painting. Okie dokie. Okay, now looking at the beak, I'm just gonna give it a little bit more love. I'm gonna mix up a little bit more of an orange color. I wanna come in and just create a little bit of a divide here for my beak. I can even come in underneath and just kind of shadow it a little bit so it looks a little bit darker. And then for my little pom-pom, I'm gonna grab my bleed proof white that I have right here. And I'm just gonna break it up. I went a little bit too heavy here with some of this bleed proof white. Can even put it on my little beak in my penguin area as well. So the other thing I want to do is just add a little bit more depth to like my hat a little bit. Let's adding a little bit more of that purple color. And then I'm going to add a little bit of brown here to my orange. And then I'll do that line again that I covered with my beak. And honestly, I feel pretty good about this penguin. I think it's pretty cute. I hope that you have enjoyed it. Another thing that you can do as well, this is part's totally optional, is you can come in with a little bit of a shadow, and you can just shadow underneath our penguin, and you can blend it out with some water. This will just give it a fun effect as well, but totally optional. We can even come in and just add a little bit more depth. Shadows in here. I feel like that's a little flat. Yeah, you can add as much or as little detail as you would like for your penguins. Even if you wanted to add other dark contrasts here to the penguin just to make it pop in some areas, because this is dry, like I said before, it literally just sits on top. So it's naturally just going to be darker when you paint over top of this. So you can put, again, as much detail and love into this painting as you like. I'm pretty happy with how mine turns out. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and check out my other videos that I have on my channel. I have been posting a ton of festive paintings for you to enjoy. Happy painting.